Some of the most important stories are the ones hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to tell them. Well, this is one of those stories. It's about an Indian airman and his lifelong quest to pull the modern Indian warrior out of the shadows and finally into the pages of history. Okay, so for the man at the heart of our story, these names, they weren't just a history lesson. Imagine being a kid totally absorbed in the Mahabharata, the Iliad, and all these epic World War II stories. These guys, they were his heroes. They were the legends that sparked this absolute fire in him, a fascination with warfare and the lives of the warriors who fought them. But here's the thing. As he got older, he started noticing something off, a real disconnect. We celebrate these ancient warriors, right? But what about the heroes of modern India? Their stories, they were just missing from the national conversation. And that silence, well, for him, it was deafening. He just couldn't ignore it. So that quest took him to university, and that's where his passion for military history ran smack into a brick wall of, well, academic silence. The one topic he was desperate to learn about was the one nobody seemed to be talking about. He was pretty dismayed, and you can see why. He found that mainstream historians basically treated the military history of independent India as a sideshow, a footnote. His own father was writing to him, telling him to arm himself well with history. But the books he needed, they just weren't there. That gap, that really frustrating silence, it just made him more determined than ever. And then a teacher pointed him towards someone who would change everything, the military historian John Keegan. Now, what made Keegan so incredible was his perspective, and it starts right here with this quote. He wasn't a soldier, couldn't be. A childhood illness took that path away from him, so he was an observer. And that outsider's view gave his writing this incredible depth that just clicked with our young cadet. This right here, this was a light bulb moment. Keegan's idea gave him a way to finally put words to something he'd always felt in his gut, that the world of a soldier, of a warrior, it's just different. It runs on a completely separate set of values and skills that you're just not going to find in the world of politics or diplomacy. All right, so this wasn't just some philosophy class. This way of thinking was about to get tested in the real world, big time. Because his search for understanding was about to be replaced by decades of actual first-hand experience in the cockpit as an officer in the Indian Air Force. I mean, look at this timeline. His career was basically a front row seat to modern Indian history. He's in Tezpur watching counterinsurgency operations. He's on the ground in Punjab during Operation Blue Star. He's flying missions during the massive Operation Brass Tacks. And then for years, he's patrolling the skies over the Kashmir Valley right in the middle of the proxy war. He was literally living the history he'd always wanted to study. But it's not just about the big events, right? It's the details. It's that heart-stopping adrenaline rush when you hear the warning tone. You've been locked on by an F-16's radar. It's the quiet nights listening to your army buddies describe these brutal, close-quarters fights with terrorists. It's the gut-wrenching sorrow of losing a course mate in combat. And yeah, it's also the absolute thrill of flying with the Navy and landing your jet on a moving aircraft carrier. This is life at the sharp end. So what does all this add up to? Well, these decades of intense, real-world experience, they didn't just make him a great pilot. They turned him into a really sharp critic. He started to see this massive, troubling gap between the way people talked about India in policy meetings and the reality he was living on the front lines. It was like he was seeing two completely different Indias. On one side, you have the official story, right? It's all about clever diplomacy, smart politics, a peaceful democracy making its way in the world. But the reality he saw on the ground, that was a story of constant conflict, of the incredibly high price being paid by soldiers, and it was a story that was being almost completely ignored. And this disconnect showed up in strategy too. Here's a perfect example. Back in the 90s, you had politicians and strategists debating this idea of hot pursuit into Pakistan. Sounds tough, right? But from his cockpit, he could see that nobody was actually doing the hard work of building the joint force capabilities, getting the Army and Air Force to work seamlessly together that you would absolutely need to pull something like that off. It was all talk. And you'd think the Kargil War would have fixed that, wouldn't you? I mean, that conflict brutally exposed the problems with the services not working together. But even after all that, the improvements he saw, he described them with one single powerful word: superficial. He felt the real lessons just hadn't sunk in. The changes were only skin deep. So,
This led him to ask the really tough questions, the ones he felt nobody else was asking, at least not loudly enough. Questions like, why were our troops being sent into these brutal frontal assaults without proper air support? And why on earth was the Air Force developing high-altitude bombing tactics during the war? Seriously? They'd had years to practice the stuff. For him, this lack of any real deep strategic debate was, well, it was deeply worrying.
Okay, so let's put it all together. You've got the childhood passion, the frustration in college, decades of frontline experience, and this sharp critical eye. All of it was pushing him towards a brand new mission, a mission he was probably the only person qualified to take on. A new posting to Pune finally gave him the one thing he'd been missing for years: time. He called it an intense period of intellectual awakening. For the first time, he was away from the constant pressure of operational command, and he could finally dive into the reading, the research, and this is the crucial part, actually sit down and interview the veterans whose stories were just gathering dust. And he was crystal clear about what he wanted to do and what he didn't want to do. This book was not going to be some stuffy official history or a glossy PR pamphlet. And it wasn't going to be a dry academic critique either. No, the mission was to create something honest, something kind of hybrid. Above all, it had to be a people-centric story, focusing on the human beings at the very heart of it all. I mean, he says it best himself right here. He wanted to blend a simple, easy-to-read, people-centric narrative with those crucial operational and strategic insights, to tell the human story of war but without ever losing sight of the bigger picture. Think about it. After a whole lifetime of searching, he was finally going to write the exact book that he, as that curious little boy, could never, ever find. And so his entire quest really leaves us with this one big, profound question. It's the question that drove his whole life's work, and it's something I think we all need to think about. What really happens? What's the cost when a nation leaves its warriors out of its own story?